It's fair to say that one is sport for choice when evaluating the evilest members of the Nazi Party, as no other organisation in history has managed to produce such a broad and expansive litany of loathsome individuals. So vast is its roster of rotten members, in fact, that many abhorrent individuals who would be reviled as icons of evil if they came from a more moral society managed to remain annoyingly absent from the historical zeitgeist, their wicked deeds being completely overshadowed by the extreme evil of the creme de la creme of Nazi society. Well, today we're going to shine a light on a few of these lesser-known monsters, so let's get into it. So, let's begin with Paul Blobel. Born on the 13th of August 1894 in Potsdam, Germany, his early life was quite the mundane affair, initially pursuing a career in architecture before serving with the German army in World War I. Post-war, however, his life would take a dark turn as he fell in with the Nazis. Blobel joined the party and the SS in 1931. There he found his calling as he shot through the ranks at lightning speed, eventually becoming a colonel by 1941. He would hold a number of commands before the Nazi Empire came crumbling down, but the one that would really earn him his infamy was Sonderkommando 4A of the Einsatzgruppen, one of the Nazi paramilitary death squads that followed in the wake of the German army as it conquered its way across Europe and dealt with the various groups Hitler's deranged mind had decried as undesirable. His most notorious operation, leading the unit, was one at Babi Yar, just outside of Kiev, Ukraine, where, over the course of 2 days in September 1941, he had Sonderkommando 4A execute 33,771 Jewish men, women, and children, one of the largest single massacres of the Holocaust. The victims were rounded up from the Jewish ghetto in Kiev and brought to the Babi Yar ravine. There they were forced to hand over the valuables and strip before being lined up at the edge of the ravine, after which soldiers of the Sonderkommando 4A gunned them down and their bodies tumbled into the ravine below. Aside from orchestrating mass murders such as these, Blobel also played a pivotal role in the Nazis' attempts to conceal their crimes. For example, in June 1942, Heinrich Himmler appointed him to head Action 1005, a covert operation aimed at exhuming mass graves and burning the bodies found within. Not that he would be getting his hands dirty, mind you. No, because rather than have his own men exhume the mass graves, he made use of Jewish slave laborers for that grim task. These so-called corpse units were forced to dig up mass graves from sun-up to sundown every day, sometimes with no other tool than their own bare hands, all at gunpoint. Then, when Blobel and his men suspected that they had surpassed their usefulness or knew too much, they themselves were killed and disposed of by a new corpse unit. After the war, Blobel was arrested and thrown into the dock at the Nuremberg trial, specifically in the Einsatzgruppen trial of 1947 through 1948. His defense strategy centered on the claim that he was merely following orders, a common defense that was used by many Nazi officials to try and dodge responsibility for their crimes. However, for Blobel, this defense proved to be woefully inadequate. The prosecution was able to provide overwhelming evidence of his willing involvement in numerous war crimes and crimes against humanity, including detailed records of operations he led, eyewitness testimonies, and his own admissions during pre-trial interrogations. As a result of this, he was found guilty, and he met his fate at the bottom of a long rope in 1951 when he was hanged for his crimes. For our next lesser-known Nazi, let's take a look at Oskar Deranger. Born in Würzburg, Germany on the 26th of September 1895, his early life gave little indication of the evil that would later take hold of his mind. He served in the German army during World War I and then pursued a career in academia, earning a doctorate in political science. But as he was doing this, he also began getting involved in politics as a very early member of the Nazi Party, joining both the party itself and the SA in 1923. Come World War II, he had also joined the SS, where he had earned himself a reputation as a violent and sadistic alcoholic. Men of such character were exactly the sort the Nazis needed, however, so he was given command of the SS Sonderkommando Deranger, a penal unit that was made up of criminals of all kinds, but was mostly comprised of poachers and violent offenders. The aim of this unit was simple: to give the men pressed into it a chance to earn their absolution through the slaughter of Nazism's enemies, be they civilian or military. Perhaps unsurprisingly, the unit became infamous for its barbaric actions, as the crimes it committed under Deranger's command were simply staggering in both their cruelty and in their scope. In Belarus, for example, they were responsible for the mass killings of civilians, often conducting large-scale massacres in towns and villages. These massacres typically involved rounding up entire population of a village, including women, children, and the elderly, and executing them en masse. The victims were often killed by gunshot, but reports also indicate the use of other methods of killing, including burning people alive or torturing them until death. In addition to killings, Derainger's unit was also notorious for burning down settlements and leaving nothing but ruins in their wake. Officially, these acts were intended to destroy logistical support for Soviet partisans and serve as a form of collective punishment against the civilian population. In reality, however, strategy was not on Derainger's mind at all during these operations. He simply derived sadistic pleasure from seeing people suffer. But all of that was just the tip of the iceberg when it came to Derainger's true capacity for evil, and it wouldn't be until the Warsaw Uprising of 1944 that he would be at its worst. There, his unit conducted mass-scale house-to-house raids, indiscriminately dragging out and executing residents, including women and children, without reservation or hesitation. It is unknown how many people were killed as a result of this, but historians are certain that the number runs well into the tens of thousands. Derainger's unit also committed rape on a wholesale scale while in Warsaw, all with his full knowledge and blessing. These acts were often carried out publicly and with such savagery that even other members of the SS were taken aback by the extent of the brutality. The motivation behind Derainger's actions can be traced to a combination of deep-seated psychopathy and a fervent belief in Nazi ideology. His personal history, including a conviction for a sexual offense before the war, proves he had a long-standing pattern of deviant behavior, and then the Nazi regime simply provided him with the perfect excuse to indulge all of his most depraved violent fantasies while pretending he was serving some greater good. Come the end of the war, the time came for Deranger to face the music, but for him, retribution would not come at the end of a rope, but through a savage beating, because while he was in custody in late 1945, he was beaten to death by his Polish prison guards. To which we can only say, what a shame. Next we have Odilo Glot, a man who embodied the archetypal evil Nazi. Born on the 21st of April 1904 in Trieste, then part of Austria-Hungary, Globotnik was born just a smidge too late to serve in World War I, so instead he spent his early life bouncing around menial occupations while getting gradually more interested in politics. Then, having found the extreme right of the spectrum to his liking, he joined a Nazi-aligned Carinthian paramilitary group in 1922. Then, for the next decade or so, he proceeded to drink the Nazi Kool-Aid by the gallon, which led to him finally joining the party itself in 1931 and the SS in 1934. Come the war, Globotnik had thoroughly proved his commitment to the Nazi cause to the powers that be, and so he was rewarded with being made the SS and police leader in the Lublin district of occupied Poland. In this capacity, he oversaw the implementation of some of the most brutal and inhumane aspects of Nazi policy, with a notable example being Aktion Reinhardt. This program, named after Reinhard Heydrich, was one of the most lethal phases of the Holocaust, as it saw the establishment of Belzec, Sobibor, and the Treblinka extermination camps, all under Globotnik's careful eye. He ran them with ruthless efficiency, and ultimately, over 2 million Jews would be exterminated under his command. Unlike concentration camps such as Dachau or Bergen-Belsen, which sought to productively work their inmates to death over time, the pure extermination camps Globotnik led cut out the middleman and instead were tasked purely with the wholesale industrial slaughter of Nazi undesirables, as many as possible, as fast as possible. At Treblinka, for example, incoming victims were deceived into thinking they were arriving at a transit camp to keep them docile, only to be pounced upon, stripped of their valuables, and forced to undress at gunpoint, after which they were immediately marched to the gas chambers to be killed. Those who refused or dallied were dragged out from the crowd and shot without hesitation to encourage the other victims to shut up, hurry up, and play along. The camp did have a living area, but this was naught but a holding pen for days when the camp's murder apparatus found itself inoperable or over capacity. And if victims thought about trying to resist, God help them, because Globotnik would crack down on them with an immediate, heavy, and sadistic hand. No better is this exemplified than with the Treblinka Revolt of the 2nd of August 1943, an incident in which a number of Jewish prisoners confined to the living area managed to liberate a cache of weapons from the SS armory and then proceeded to attempt to shoot their way to freedom, as well as burn as much of the camp down as they could, for good measure. Globotnik responded to this by having his SS troops gun down the entire camp, with survivors being forced into the surviving buildings and set on fire. But while the extermination camps were certainly the peak of Globotnik's evil, they were far from the only wicked scheme he found himself involved in, as his career also saw him partake in the liquidation of both the Warsaw and Barlastok ghettos, as well as the establishment of the Lublin Reservation and its associated concentration camps, and the hunting and murder of Italian Jews following the fall of Mussolini's government in 1943. Globotnik survived the war, and in a desperate attempt to evade justice, he fled deep into the Austrian mountains. He was then captured by the British less than a month after Germany's surrender, but unfortunately, before he could be brought to trial, he committed suicide and escaped being held accountable for his crimes. Let's now look at Franz Stangle. Born on the 26th of March 1908 in Altmünster, Austria, he was a man who worked closely under Globotnik, eventually rising through the ranks to go from being a humble police officer to the commandant of Sobibor and Treblinka extermination camps. He joined both the Austrian Federal Police and the Nazi Party in 1931. For a time, his politics and his work were separate things in his life, but that changed in 1935 when he moved to Germany to join the Kriminalpolizei, the Nazi FBI. From here, with his foot through the door of the Nazi political establishment, he shot up the ranks, eventually finding himself at the head of the Hartheim Euthanasia Center after being personally appointed by Himmler himself in November 1940. The center itself was one established for the T4 program, a Nazi eugenics scheme initiated in 1939 under the guise of mercy killings. It aimed to exterminate individuals deemed life unworthy of life, including people with severe psychiatric, neurological, or physical disabilities, as well as those considered incurably sick. An estimated 300,000 people were killed by this program by way of gas and lethal injection, and Stangle, as the head of one of its centers, contributed more than his fair share to this number. Stangle did so well at the center that in April 1942 he earned himself a promotion that saw him shipped off to Poland to be the first commandant of the Sobibor extermination camp. Curiously, Stangle kept his hands clean and left the bulk of the brutality to his lackeys, with him only being accused of a single act of violence during his time leading the camp. Now, don't let this fool you into thinking that he wasn't a total monster. He knew exactly what he was doing, and while he may have kept his hands clean, he took just as much sadistic pleasure from his work as Derlewanger did. We know this because Shlomo Schmanzno, one of only 58 known survivors of the camp, recalled him as being a man who took obvious pleasure in his work and his situation, and who always had an ear-to-ear grin plastered across his face. All in all, around 100,000 Jews were killed during Stangle's tenure as commandant. By September 1942, Stangle had earned himself such a reputation for competence that Globotnik ordered him to take over as the commandant of Treblinka, the previous leader of which had proven himself to be grossly incompetent and incapable of meeting his killing targets. At Treblinka, he maintained the same enthusiasm for his work as he had at Sobibor. He immediately oversaw the construction of new, larger gas chambers to supplement the existing facilities. These new gas chambers were up and running within a matter of weeks and were capable of killing 15,000 people a day. So pleased was he with the construction that when they were finished, he quipped to his men that, finally, the Jewish city is ready. He also maintained his same distance from the prisoners as he had previously, continuing to leave the application of brutality to his jack-booted goons. At the end of the war, Stangle was detained by US forces, but managed to escape in 1948 before he could be put on trial, fleeing down through Italy, across the Mediterranean, and eventually to Brazil. His own hubris proved to be his downfall, however, because when in Brazil, he made no attempt to hide his identity and was eventually arrested by the Brazilian police in 1967 and extradited back to West Germany to face justice. Unfortunately, however, he died of heart failure in 1971 before the case could be brought to court, and thus escaped ever having to answer for his crimes. A final, lesser-known Nazi, Ilse Koch, often referred to as the Beast of Buchenwald, was born on the 22nd of September 1906 in Dresden, Germany. By all accounts, her early life was most unremarkable, but that would all change following a marriage to Karl Otto Koch in 1936, who would later become the commandant of the Buchenwald and Majdanek concentration camps. Ilse Koch's name became synonymous with cruelty and sadism during her time at Buchenwald, where she was known for her barbaric and inhumane treatment of prisoners. She was particularly noted for her bizarre and gruesome habit of collecting items made from the tattooed skin of murdered inmates. And bear in mind, she never once collected a paycheck for any of this. She only found herself at the camp via her husband. So for her, there could be no, "I was just doing my job," Nuremberg defense. She was just a sadistic monster. Simple as that. Her life in the camp was marked by a perverse mix of luxury and brutality. As the wife of the commandant, she lived a life of material comfort and privilege, and would often ride through the camp on horseback, flaunting her authority and her role in the prisoners' suffering. But this was just the tip of the iceberg, because on her worst days, she would select prisoners with interesting tattoos, have them murdered, and make their skin into lampshades, book covers, and other items for her ever-growing personal collection of macabre trinkets. Beyond this, she also liked to partake in the sadistic abuse of prisoners, arbitrarily forcing them to endure beatings, humiliation, and psychological torture. There was no reason for this, not even the supposed keeping of order. She was simply a wicked demon of a woman who enjoyed seeing people suffer. Come the end of the war, she managed to escape justice for a time. Initially, she was arrested by US forces in 1945, but avoided conviction thanks to absolutely shoddy evidence gathering on the part of American prosecutors. However, further investigation and subsequent trials finally saw her get what she deserved, and so in 1947 she was convicted on charges of war crimes, narrowly avoiding the rope, and instead was sentenced to life in prison. But don't be disappointed, viewers, because while she might have escaped the hangman's noose, she didn't exactly have a fun time in prison. You see, as time went on, she became even more psychotic and delusional, convinced that a Jewish conspiracy was underway to see her sent to her grave, and it was only a matter of time before a mob of concentration camp survivors battered down her cell door and lynched her where she stood. Eventually, she decided to save the fictitious conspirators a job, and after improvising a noose out of a bedsheet, she hung herself in 1967, writing in a suicide note that there is no other way. Death, for me, is a release.